You know that feeling, right? You're trying to analyze some movement from a video, and it's just a shaky, blurry mess. It's so frustrating. Well, today, we're going to change all that. We are going to transform that frustration into pure precision. I'll show you how to turn basically any camera you have into this powerful tool for capturing crystal clear data. Trust me, it's going to make your analysis way easier and a whole lot more accurate.
So it really just boils down to this: the difference between useless footage and genuinely actionable footage. I mean, look at the left. That's the stuff that just ruins an analysis, isn't it? You've got motion blur hiding all the key moments, shaky cams that make measuring anything impossible, and the wrong perspective that hides the exact movements you're trying to see. But on the right, that's the goal. Crisp, stable, informative video where every single phase of motion is just perfectly clear. Honestly, this is the bedrock of good biomechanics.
And you know what? Getting there is way simpler than you probably think. We're going to break it all down into 3 super straightforward steps. First up, we'll talk about choosing the perfect angle. Then, we'll get into dialing in your camera settings. And to wrap it all up, I'll give you some simple, ready-to-use setups for the most common analyses. Sound good? All right, let's dive in.
All right, first things first, let's talk about choosing the perfect angle. This is our first major pillar, and it is all about perspective. Seriously, where you put your camera isn't just about what's convenient. It literally determines what you can see and what you can't. The right angle can reveal all the secrets of a movement, while the wrong one, well, it just hides them in plain sight.
So where do we start? With the 3 foundational views: front, side, and rear. Just think of these as your primary toolkit, your bread and butter. Pretty much any basic biomechanical analysis you're going to do, whether it's running, walking, squatting, you name it, is going to rely on at least one of these and probably all 3. Okay, first up, the front view. This one is all about capturing the frontal plane. And its real superpower? Assessing asymmetry. This is your absolute go-to for looking at things like step width, knee valgus or varus, and pelvic symmetry. You can ask questions like, are the hips dropping to one side? Is there a lot of lateral sway? The front view tells you all of that, plain and simple. Then we've got the side view. This one looks at the sagittal plane, and honestly, it's the gold standard for anything related to timing and kinematics. It is by far the best way to clearly see key events like heel strike and toe off. From this angle, you can see all those flexion and extension angles, hip, knee, ankle, plus you get a great look at things like stride length and trunk lean. It's essential. And rounding out our foundational trio is the rear view. This angle is fantastic for getting another perspective on hip stability and pelvic drop. In fact, it's awesome for spotting things like a Trendelenburg sign, where the hip drops on the non-stance side. It also gives you a really clear look at what the foot is doing, pronation, supination, and just the general alignment of the limbs from the back. But look, sometimes the basic 3 just aren't going to cut it. For really specific questions, we need to bring in the specialists, specialized angles. These are the views that solve those unique, tricky problems and give you insights that you just can't get from the standard front, side, or rear views.
So let's do a quick rundown of these. First, the oblique or 45-degree view. It's a decent compromise for general screening, especially if you're tight on space. But just know it's not great for super precise measurements. Then you have a high view, which is awesome for tracking the path someone takes, but it's going to distort your joint angles. A low, ground-level view, unbeatable for seeing foot strike patterns, but it tells you almost nothing about the rest of the body. And finally, the top-down or overhead view. This one is the undisputed king for analyzing rotation. But, and it's a big but, it usually needs a special mount and can be a real pain to light properly.
All right, so we've got our angles figured out. Now let's move on to the second pillar, dialing in your settings. This is where the magic really happens. We're going to turn a simple camera, even the one on your phone, into a legit scientific instrument that can practically stop time. First up, and you could argue this is the most important setting of all, is shutter speed. So what is it? It's just how long the camera sensor is exposed to light for every single frame. For our purposes, its one and only job is to freeze motion. You have to remember, motion blur is the absolute enemy of analysis. It makes it totally impossible to accurately pinpoint where a joint center is. And this chart just says it all, doesn't it? It shows the trade-off perfectly. If you're using a slow shutter speed, say 1/60th of a second, you might get a bright picture, but any fast movement just turns into a useless, blurry streak. But when you crank that speed way up to 1,000th of a second or even faster, that same movement is frozen in time. It's perfectly crisp and it's ready for analysis. For fast human movement, a fast shutter is simply non-negotiable, period.
Next up is frame rate, which we measure in frames per second or FPS. All this is how many pictures your camera is snapping every single second to create the video. Think of it this way. The more frames you have, the smoother the motion looks. And what's really crucial for us is that more frames means more data points. That lets you pinpoint the exact moment something happens, like a foot hitting the ground.
So the big question is, what frame rate do you actually need? Well, it all depends on how fast the action is. For something relatively slow, like a walking gait, somewhere between 60 and 120 frames per second is going to be plenty. But for those faster, more explosive actions, we're talking running, jumping, cutting, you've got to be up in the 120 to 240 FPS range, maybe even higher if you want to capture all that juicy detail. Okay, a few other critical settings to quickly run through. ISO boosts your brightness, but the trade-off is more image noise, so you want to keep that as low as possible. Aperture, or f-stop, controls your depth of field. Basically, you want your whole subject in sharp focus. For your lens, a 35 to 50 millimeter is kind of the sweet spot to avoid weird distortion. But listen, the most important element here is lighting. Good, bright light is what makes a fast shutter and a high frame rate even possible. It's the key that unlocks everything else.
Okay, we have covered angles and we have covered settings. Now, for my favorite part. Let's put it all together into some simple, practical recipes that you can use, like today. Think of this as your cheat sheet for getting that perfect capture every time. First up on our recipe list, a standard walking gait analysis. Here's what you do. You're going to want to capture from the front, the side, and the rear angles. Set your frame rate somewhere between 60 and 120 FPS and get your shutter speed between 1/250th and 1/500th of a second. Do that, and you're going to get beautifully clear, smooth footage of the whole gait cycle. Okay, now what about running or sprinting? Well, things are moving a lot faster, so our settings have to level up too. For this, focus on the side and front views. You need to boost that frame rate to at least 120, but ideally 240 FPS. And that shutter speed, you gotta crank it way up, somewhere between 1/500th and 1/2000th of a second. That's what it takes to completely freeze that kind of high-speed action. Next recipe, jump analysis. A jump is super explosive, so guess what? Your settings have to be too. A side and front view are going to work perfectly. Your frame rate should be in that 120 to 240 FPS range. But, and this is important, pay really close attention to your shutter speed. You need it at 1/1000th of a second, maybe even faster, if you want a perfectly sharp image right at the peak of the jump or the instant of landing. And last but not least, let's talk about cutting and agility movements. Now, remember that specialized overhead angle we talked about? This is where it really shines. It lets you see all the rotation and foot placement during a change of direction. You'll want to pair that with a side view. For settings, you're looking at 120 FPS or more and a shutter speed of at least 1/1500th of a second to cleanly capture those super rapid shifts in momentum. So look, if there's just one thing you remember from all of this, please let it be this. Clarity of motion begins with clarity of capture. I mean, you could have the most expensive, most advanced analysis software in the world, but if the video you're feeding it is garbage, well, your results are going to be garbage too. It all, and I mean all of it, starts with getting that capture right. By mastering these pretty simple principles of angles and settings, you've basically unlocked a new superpower, the ability to see human movement with incredible, mind-blowing detail. The power is literally in your hands now. So I guess the only question left to ask is, now that you can see every single detail, what are you going to discover?